The scent of lilies and money filled the air. Avery stood at the entrance to the Sterling Grand Hotel's ballroom, a lavish space lit by crystal chandeliers, each one worth more than a year of her college tuition. The murmur of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the soft strains of classical music formed a symphony of wealth and power. She had spent 15 years building a world for herself, a world of glass-walled boardrooms, lines of code and billion-dollar figures. But here in the very town of Maple Creek, Pennsylvania, that she had fled, she felt like a lost 18-year-old girl again. An event planner with a professional smile approached her, fingers gliding across a tablet. "Ms. Thorne, is it? Welcome. Let me show you to your table." Avery nodded, following the woman through a maze of round tables. She recognized a few faces, old neighbors, now aged distant relatives she vaguely remembered. They looked at her with curiosity, their whispers following her like a shadow. "That's Avery Thorne, the one who left. I hear she's very successful." She looked for the head table where her family was seated. Her mother, Eleanor, resplendent in a sky-blue dress, was laughing with Helen Davenport. Her father, Edward, looked thinner, but retained his customary sternness, conversing with Richard Davenport, a man who wore the confidence of someone born at the finish line. And between them was Liam, her brother, the groom. He looked nervous, his smile strained as if he were playing a role for which he hadn't learned the lines. But the planner didn't lead her there. They walked past the main table, past the tables for close friends. They headed toward the back where the lighting was dimmer and the music faded, giving way to the distant clatter of dishes. They stopped before a plain grey door. "Here you are," the woman said, her voice flat. Avery frowned. "This is a service entrance. Your seating was specially arranged," the woman replied, avoiding Avery's gaze as she opened the door. A wall of sound and heat hit her. The shouts of the chef, the sizzle of grease, the roar of the industrial dishwasher. And there, in a cluttered corner, tucked behind stacks of plates and an industrial trash can, was a small, bare metal table. On it was a single plate, a set of cutlery wrapped in a paper napkin, a single chair. The truth hit Avery not as a shock, but as a cold confirmation. This was not a mistake. This was a message delivered with cruel precision. Her rage didn't ignite like a fire. It crystallized, cold and sharp as a shard of ice in her chest. The 18-year-old Avery who craved approval was long dead. The woman standing here was the CEO of Thorne Dynamics, and she did not tolerate disrespect. She turned and walked back into the ballroom without a word to the planner. She strode directly to the head table, her steps steady and powerful. Conversations died as she approached. "There's been a small problem," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. Camilla, the bride, in her pristine white gown, looked at her with feigned innocence. "Oh, Avery, what's wrong?" "My seating arrangement," Avery said simply. "It's in the kitchen." A heavy silence fell. Eleanor, her mother, turned pale. "Avery, don't." "Why?" Avery cut her off, her gaze sweeping over each person. Her father, who had once said her computer thing was just a hobby. Her mother, who had said she would fail and come running back. And Liam, who had called her, his voice dripping with false urgency. "Why am I sitting in the kitchen?" Richard Davenport cleared his throat, trying to manage the situation. "A minor misunderstanding, surely. We just wanted to ensure our most important business partners had the best seats." He gave a strained laugh. "By the way, once you're settled, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Nexus Innovations contract. Liam mentioned you have significant influence there." And there it was. The final card had been played. She wasn't family, she was leverage. Avery smiled, but it didn't reach her steel-cold eyes. "All right. Let's talk about Nexus Innovations." She took out her phone, her movements swift and precise. She dialed a number, the entire table watching with bated breath. Marcus, it's Avery, she said, her voice crisp. An update on the Nexus contractor list. Remove Davenport Manufacturing. Yes, permanently. Reason, irreconcilable ethical conflicts. Send me a confirmation email within the next 5 minutes. She ended the call. The room was so quiet, you could hear a fork drop at the next table. Richard Davenport's face contorted with fury and disbelief. What did you just do? I just saved my company from doing business with frauds, Avery said, her voice even. She looked at Liam, who now looked like a ghost. You know, Liam, for 15 years you never once asked me about your email password. It's still Red Sox 1988. So predictable. Just like you. She placed her phone on the table with a soft but definitive click. I was invited here as a tool. I was treated like a servant, but you made a grave mistake. She looked each of them directly in the eye. You forgot who I am. She turned and walked away. She didn't hurry, didn't flee. She walked like a queen leaving a corrupt court. As she crossed the ballroom, she felt every eye on her, but she didn't care. The weight of the past, of their disdain of having to prove herself, had vanished. The heavy ballroom door closed behind her. Not as an end, but as a beginning. She wasn't being cast out. She was being set free. The silence of the Sterling Grand's lobby enveloped Avery like a thick blanket. It was a stark contrast to the chaos she knew was erupting behind the ballroom doors she had just closed. The click of her heels echoed on the polished marble floor, each step an affirmation. She wasn't running, she was making an orderly retreat. As she passed through the automatic glass doors and into the cool Pennsylvania evening, the phone in her purse began to vibrate violently. She didn't need to look to know who it was. That frantic, desperate buzzing could only come from a family in full-blown panic. She ignored it, walking directly to the valet stand. The pale yellow light from the lampposts cast a glow on her rented Audi A8, a sleek black bubble of safety and anonymity. She slid into the driver's seat, the scent of new leather enveloping her. The silence in the car was a relief. She placed her purse on the passenger seat. The phone inside continued its relentless buzzing. Finally, it stopped, only to be immediately replaced by a cascade of text message notifications on the car's synced display. Liam Avery, what are you doing? Call me back now? Dad, your behaviour is completely unacceptable. You are ruining your brother's wedding and embarrassing this family. Mum, Avery, sweetheart, please reconsider. Family is everything. Avery let out a dry, mirthless laugh. Family is everything, a phrase only uttered when they needed something. She started the car, the engine purring to life. She wouldn't go back to the hotel room she'd booked. It would be the first place they'd look. Instead, she drove aimlessly into the night, down the familiar roads of Maple Creek roads she had once ridden her bike on as a child, dreaming of somewhere anywhere else. The phone rang again. This time she glanced at the screen. It was Liam. After 5 missed calls, she decided to answer, routing it through the car's speakers. What? Her voice was ice. Avery. Thank God you answered. Liam's voice was breathless, panicked. The noise in the background suggested he was somewhere outside the ballroom. You have to come back and fix this. There's nothing to fix, Liam, she said, her hands tightening on the steering wheel. You broke it yourself a long time ago. You don't understand, he yelled, his voice cracking. That contract was everything. Dad's company is on the brink of bankruptcy. This marriage, this merger with the Davenports. It was our last hope. So you admit it, Avery said, not a hint of surprise in her voice. It was a business deal. It's more complicated than that, Liam stammered. I do care about Camilla, but the business situation. Richard knew about your connection to Nexus. He made it clear that having you here, showing a united family front, would help seal the deal. A united family front, Avery repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. By seating me in the kitchen. A long silence stretched on the other end of the line. That was Camilla's idea, Liam finally whispered. I swear I didn't know until it happened. I should have stood up for you. Yes, you should have, she replied. But you never have you, Liam? You've spent your entire life letting Mum and Dad shield you from every consequence while I had to fight for every scrap of recognition. I'm sorry, Avery. I'm truly sorry. His voice was desperate. Is there any way you'd reconsider the contract? I mean, the wedding's a bust, but the business could still be saved. Avery stared at the dark road ahead. For a fleeting moment, she felt a pang of pity for her weak-willed brother. But then, she realized that saving him now would only perpetuate a toxic cycle. It was time to break it. No, Liam, I won't reconsider. What happens to the company now is not my responsibility. It never was. What about family loyalty? He asked weakly. Loyalty is a two-way street. When was the last time any of you showed any loyalty to me? She asked, and his silence was the only answer she needed. Good luck with your marriage, Liam. She ended the call before he could say anything more. She muted her phone's notifications and sound, letting the silence envelop her once more. Instead of returning to a hotel, she drove to a small, quiet bar on the edge of town called the Oak Barrel, a place she remembered as being dark and discreet enough that no one would recognize her. The bar was mostly empty, with just a few locals at the counter. Avery chose a booth in a dark corner, ordered a scotch, and stared into the amber liquid. The adrenaline was beginning to wear off, leaving a hollow, weary feeling in its wake. She didn't feel victorious. She just felt exhausted. Ms. Thorne, a quiet voice cut through her thoughts. Avery looked up. A woman about her age, dressed in a bartender's uniform, was standing by the table. I'm sorry to bother you, the woman said. I'm Sarah Evans. I used to be an accountant at your father's company. Avery narrowed her eyes, trying to place the name. Sarah, yes, I remember you. You worked there for a few years, right? Sarah nodded, a sad smile on her lips. 6 years, until last year. What happened? Avery asked, genuinely curious. I got pregnant, Sarah said simply. I requested my legally mandated maternity leave. Your father called me into his office and said the company couldn't afford to hold my position. He fired me on the spot. Avery's anger, which had been cooling, flared anew. That sounds like him. I heard what happened at the hotel, Sarah said, quietly glancing around. A friend of mine is on the catering staff. She texted me. I just wanted to say thank you for standing up to them. No one ever does. Avery looked at the woman before her, a single mother wronged by the same family that had just disowned her. And in that moment, Avery made a decision. Do you still have your resume, Sarah? Avery asked. Sarah blinked, surprised. Yes, I do. My company is opening a new satellite office in Boston. We need an experienced accounting manager, someone resilient who isn't afraid to speak the truth. Avery pulled a business card from her wallet and slid it across the table. Email me your resume in the morning. Sarah's eyes widened, then filled with tears. Are you serious? Perfectly serious, Avery said. Thorne Dynamics doesn't fire employees for wanting a family. As Sarah walked back to the bar, emotional and overwhelmed, Avery took a sip of her scotch. The smoky liquid burned in her chest. She hadn't fixed her family, but maybe, just maybe, she could start building a new one founded on respect and real loyalty. She took out her phone, not to check the angry messages, but to book a flight, the earliest one out of Pennsylvania in the morning. It was time to go home, to the life she had built for herself. Avery left the Oak Barrel just after midnight. The crisp, cold night air cleared her head from the scotch. She didn't drive back to the Sterling Grand, where she knew her family might be waiting. Instead, she found a simple roadside motel, paid in cash, and took only her purse inside. Her Audi and luggage were still at the hotel, but she didn't care. Those were material things replaceable. The freedom she felt in this moment was priceless. She slept a deep, dreamless sleep for the first time in nights. When her alarm went off at 4:30 a.m., it was still pitch black. She called one car service to the motel and another to the Sterling Grand to retrieve her luggage and return the rental car. She arranged it all with a detached efficiency, the same way she'd manage a complex corporate merger. By 5:15 a.m., she was sitting in the nearly empty regional airport, a hot black coffee in her hands. As the sun began to rise, painting the horizon in shades of pink and orange, her phone silent all night lit up. An email, not from her family. The subject line read, "Resume, Sarah Evans." Avery opened the attachment. Sarah's resume was clean and professional. 6 years of accounting experience, excellent bookkeeping skills, a degree from a good state university. But it was one line at the bottom, under experience, that caught Avery's eye. Reason for leaving position eliminated due to corporate restructuring. A polite lie. A lie Sarah probably had to repeat in job interviews to hide the ugly truth of being fired for being pregnant. Avery felt a fresh surge of anger. She wasn't just giving Sarah a job. She was righting an injustice. She forwarded the email to her head of HR with a short note, "Victoria, review this candidate for the new Boston office accounting manager position. Top priority. Set up a video interview for Monday." When her flight was called, a sense of relief washed over her. She was leaving this place. The whine of the jet engines as the plane took off felt like a sigh of release. Looking out the window, Maple Creek shrank below the familiar houses and streets, becoming a soulless map. She had thought leaving 15 years ago was an act of courage, but now she realized it had just been an escape. Today, for the first time, she was truly leaving on her own terms. The flight to Boston was short and uneventful. When the plane touched down at Logan International Airport, Avery turned her phone back on. A flood of dozens of messages and missed calls poured in. She scrolled through them mechanically. The panic, the accusations, the pleas. They seemed to come from another world, a melodrama she was no longer a part of. There was one email from Liam, sent at 3 a.m., that was different from the earlier panicked messages. Subject, "I get it. Avery Camilla left. She and her father checked out of the hotel right after you did. He said the deal was off. So was the wedding. Dad's in the living room drinking. Mum is crying. I'm sitting here realizing you were right about everything. I've spent my life following the path they laid out, too scared to be anything else. You got out. I was never brave enough. I don't blame you for what happened. I blame myself. I don't know what to do next, but for the first time, I think that might be a good thing. Liam." Avery read the email twice. There was no triumph in her, just a profound sadness for the brother she had once adored, who had been trapped in the same cage she had broken out of. She decided not to reply yet. He needed to find his own way forward. A black car was waiting for her at the airport. 40 minutes later, she walked into her penthouse in Boston's Seaport district. The floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the sparkling harbour and the city skyline. The space was open, minimalist, and immaculate. A perfect reflection of the life she had built, ordered, controlled, and entirely her own. She dropped her luggage, kicked off her heels, and walked barefoot on the cool hardwood floors. She made a cup of tea, breathing in the familiar scent of her home, not the cloying smell of lilies or the grease of a kitchen, but Earl Grey and fresh sea air. This was her sanctuary, the place where her accomplishments were celebrated on the walls, in the form of business awards, not hidden in the kitchen. She sat on the white leather sofa, looking out at the city as it started a new day. The weekend was just beginning, but for Avery, her new life had started last night. The bridges to the past had been burned. Now it was time to see what she could build in the open space she had created. The first step was already taken. An email had been sent. An interview was scheduled. A small injustice in the world was about to be righted. It was a start. Monday arrived with the ruthless precision of a Swiss watch. For Avery, it was a welcome return to order after the chaos of the weekend. The headquarters of Thorne Dynamics occupied the top 3 floors of a glass and steel skyscraper in Boston's financial district. It was a world of clean lines, cutting-edge technology, and focused silence a universe away from the suffocating emotions of Maple Creek. "Good morning, Avery," Marcus, her CFO and most trusted confidant, said as he walked into her corner office. "How was your weekend eventful?" Avery replied, not looking up from her tablet. "What's the status with Nexus and Davenport?" Marcus placed a coffee on her desk. "Handled. The contract was officially rerouted to Alvarez Tech. The CEO of Nexus called this morning. He seemed amused. Amused? Richard Davenport apparently called him Saturday night trying to salvage the deal," Marcus explained. "He spun some tale about a tragic family misunderstanding. The Nexus CEO did not appreciate being dragged into family drama. Our explanation of ethical conflicts looked much cleaner and more professional. In fact, I think we gained points with them for acting so decisively." Avery nodded. It was a reminder that in her world, reputation was everything. Richard Davenport, by trying to manipulate her, had tarnished his own. "Good," she said. "And the accounting candidate I sent over," Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Victoria was surprised to get a direct request from you. She's scheduled a video interview for 11 a.m. Would you like me to report back on the results?" "No need," Avery said. "I'll be joining that call." Marcus's surprise was visible, but he was smart enough not to question it. A CEO sitting in on an interview for a mid-level management position was almost unheard of. But for Avery, this wasn't just another interview. This was a statement. At 11 a.m., Avery joined the video call from her office. On the screen were Victoria, her head of HR, and Sarah Evans. Sarah was in what looked like her living room, looking nervous but professional in a button-down shirt. Behind her, Avery could see the corner of a baby's crib. Victoria began the interview with standard questions. Sarah answered confidently, her expertise clear. Then Victoria got to the inevitable question. "I see on your resume that your last position was eliminated due to a restructuring. Could you tell us a bit more about that?" Sarah took a subtle breath, a flicker of tension crossing her face, as she prepared to recite the well-rehearsed lie. Before she could speak, Avery interjected, her voice gentle but authoritative. "Sarah, this is Avery Thorne. At my company, we value honesty above all else. Tell us the real reason you left Thorne Manufacturing." Sarah froze. She stared at the screen, her eyes wide. For a moment, Avery thought she had pushed the woman too far. But then a subtle shift occurred in Sarah's expression. Fear gave way to resolve. "I was fired," Sarah said, her voice clear and steady, "because I was pregnant and requested my legal maternity leave." Victoria looked shocked, but Avery just nodded slowly. "Thank you for your candor, Sarah. That is exactly the kind of integrity we look for." She looked at Victoria. "Victoria, draw up an offer letter, top of the salary band for this position, plus a full relocation package. Welcome to Thorne Dynamics, Sarah." Tears rolled silently down Sarah's cheeks, but she was smiling. "Thank you, Ms. Thorne. Thank you." When the call ended, Avery felt a deep satisfaction that no business deal could ever provide. She hadn't just filled a position, she had changed a life. The afternoon passed in a series of meetings. Avery immersed herself completely in the work, the familiar comfort of spreadsheets and market strategies a soothing balm. Around 4 p.m. However, Marcus entered her office again, his expression serious. "We have a problem," he said. "Not our problem, but you should be aware. Word is getting around the industry about Davenport being dropped by Nexus. Some of their other suppliers are getting nervous. It seems Richard was using the projected receivables from the Nexus contract as collateral for several loans. Losing that contract wasn't just a loss, it could trigger a full-blown financial crisis for them." Avery listened, her face unreadable. She felt no joy at Richard Davenport's misfortune. She felt a cold, clinical distance. These were the laws of the world they all inhabited. Bad decisions led to dire consequences. Richard had gambled on being able to manipulate her, and he had lost. Her day ended. She returned to her penthouse as the city began to light up. She was pouring herself a glass of wine when an email notification popped up on her phone. It wasn't a work email. The sender was a law firm she didn't recognize, Franklin Shaw and Associates. Subject notification of bankruptcy filing, Thorne Manufacturing Inc. Avery's heart stopped for a second. She opened the email. It was short and legalistic. The firm represented Thorne Manufacturing, and they were obligated to inform known family members that the company had filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, total liquidation. All assets would be sold to pay off creditors. The company was dead. The thing her parents had prioritized above her. The thing Liam had been forced to inherit. The source of every comparison, every disappointment, every unfairness in her life was gone. She stood there in the middle of her luxurious apartment overlooking a sparkling city, holding a digital piece of paper that announced the end of an era. She had thought walking out of the wedding was the final act. She was wrong. This was the true end, and it brought not a feeling of victory, but just a deep, echoing silence. The bankruptcy notice sat on Avery's phone screen, the words cold and impersonal, total liquidation. It read like an obituary, not for a business, but for a way of life, a warped legacy that had defined her family for generations. Avery's first feeling wasn't joy or grief, but a strange emptiness. The mountain she had spent her life trying to either conquer or escape had just crumbled into dust. She didn't sleep much that night. She wandered her penthouse, the glass of wine forgotten on the kitchen counter. She remembered childhood visits to the factory, the smell of machine oil and hot metal. Her father, Edward, standing tall amidst the noisy machines, a king in his own kingdom. He had tried to explain the process to her once, but his eyes had always drifted past her to Liam, the designated heir who never showed any interest. Thorne Manufacturing had never been an industry giant. It was a small, solid business that afforded them a comfortable, middle-class life in Maple Creek. But in her parents' minds, it was an empire, something worth sacrificing their children's happiness for. And now it was gone, not because of one decision Avery made, but as the result of years of mismanagement pride and a refusal to change. The loss of the Nexus contract was just the final straw, not the root cause. The next morning, she received a text from an unknown number. "It's Liam. I'm on a prepaid phone. Mum and Dad cancelled the family plan. Guess it's their way of cutting costs." A sad smile touched Avery's lips. "They're selling the house," the next text came through. "Everything. The bankruptcy lawyer said it's not protected. They're moving into a rental apartment. Dad's not talking. Mum just cries." "I don't know what to do." Avery stared at the message, a battle raging inside her. The part of her that was still that little girl, desperate for approval, wanted to swoop in and save them. She had the resources to pay off their debts, buy the house salvage, everything. She could be the hero. But the woman she had become knew that would be a mistake. It would just be another way of enabling their dependence, another way for them to see her as a resource instead of a person. They needed to face the consequences of their own choices. So did Liam. She typed a simple, careful reply. "You're a smart guy, Liam. You'll find your way. Don't follow theirs." It was not an offer of help, not a promise of money, just a small acknowledgement of his potential, something he had probably never heard before. Over the next week, Avery threw herself into her work with an almost manic determination. She worked longer hours, pushed her teams harder. It was her coping mechanism when her emotional world was in chaos. She sought the logic and order of the business world. During that time, Sarah Evans accepted the job offer. Thorne Dynamics, HR, and relocation teams worked with ruthless efficiency. They arranged a temporary furnished apartment for her in a good Boston suburb, handled the shipping of her belongings, and even found her a high-quality daycare for her daughter. On Friday, 2 weeks after the non-wedding, Sarah arrived in Boston. Avery arranged to meet her at the new office, a bright modern space that still smelled faintly of new paint. Sarah looked like a different person. The weary anxiety had been replaced by a cautious optimism. "I don't know what to say, Ms. Thorne," Sarah began. It's incredible. Your team has taken care of everything." "Call me Avery," she said, "and you deserve it. Welcome to the team." They walked through the office, Avery explaining Sarah's new roles and responsibilities. But the conversation quickly turned more personal. "I heard about the company," Sarah said softly. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," Avery replied. "It was rotten from the inside for a long time." "How are your parents?" Sarah asked a question no one else had dared to. Avery paused by a window overlooking the city. "I don't know. They chose their path. Now they have to walk it." "That must be hard," Sarah said, her voice filled with empathy. "Leaving family behind, even when it's toxic." Avery turned to look at her. "You're right. It is." For the first time, she admitted it to someone else. "I spent 15 years trying to prove I didn't need them. But I guess a part of me always hoped that one day they would just see me." "Maybe now they will," Sarah suggested. "With the company gone, there's nothing left to hide behind." It was a thought Avery hadn't considered. She had always seen the company's collapse as an ending, but what if it was a beginning, a chance? However slim to rebuild something from the ashes, the conversation was interrupted by Avery's phone. It was Marcus. "Avery, I just heard an interesting rumor," he said. "Davenport Manufacturing is in serious trouble. Losing the Nexus contract started a domino effect. Creditors are calling in their notes, and it looks like they've been inflating their asset values for years. Richard Davenport isn't just facing bankruptcy, he might be facing fraud charges." Avery closed her eyes. The ripples from her decision continued to spread, creating tsunamis in places she hadn't expected. "Thanks for the update, Marcus." She ended the call and looked at Sarah. "It seems I'm not the only one facing consequences." "Everyone does eventually," Sarah said wisely. That night, Avery received another email from Liam. Subject: "A crazy idea. I sold my truck. I don't have much money, but it's enough to get somewhere. I'm thinking of moving to Colorado, a complete fresh start. Do something with my hands, maybe in the renewable energy sector. I always liked being outdoors. I have no idea what I'm doing, but for the first time in my life, it feels like it's my own direction. Thanks for not saving me." Reading those last words, Avery felt something unexpected. Not emptiness, not sadness, a flicker of hope. Maybe burning the old world down hadn't just freed her. Maybe, in the ashes, others could find their own way out too. 2 months passed. New England autumn began to don its spectacular coat, the leaves turning brilliant shades of yellow, orange, and crimson. For Avery, the change of seasons mirrored her own internal transformation. The initial rage and shock of the late summer's events had subsided, giving way to a pensive calm. Life at Thorne Dynamics continued at its breakneck pace. The company secured 2 major new contracts, and the Boston satellite office under Sarah Evans's steady financial hand was operating ahead of all projections. Sarah had become a valued asset, efficient and dedicated. They fell into a pattern of having lunch together, occasionally their conversations becoming less formal. Avery realized she was forming a genuine friendship, a rarity in her work-focused life. During one such lunch at a small bistro overlooking the harbour, Sarah asked the question directly. "Have you spoken to them?" Avery didn't have to ask who they were. "No, Liam texts now and then. He made it to Denver and got a job installing solar panels. Says he's never been happier." And your parents? Complete silence, Avery admitted, stirring her salad. I know they moved into an apartment complex on the other side of town. I know my childhood home was sold. That's all I know. Are you going to reach out? Sarah asked gently. I don't know, Avery said honestly. What would I do? Call and say, Hi, Mum and Dad. I hear your life has imploded. Can I help? They'd never accept it. Their pride wouldn't allow it. Maybe they don't need your help, Sarah said. Maybe they just need to know you're still there. Sarah's words stayed with Avery for the rest of the week. She had always viewed her relationship with her parents through the lens of help and obligation, what they owed her, what she owed them. She had never considered it as a matter of simple connection. On a Saturday afternoon, while sorting through some old files, she came across a postcard. It was from her mother, sent during her first year in Chicago. The postcard had a picture of a lighthouse in Maine. The message was a single line: It's getting cold. Remember to wear warm clothes. At the time, Avery had interpreted it as a criticism, a veiled way of saying she couldn't take care of herself. But now, looking at it with older eyes, she saw something else, a clumsy attempt at care, a way of saying, I miss you, without having to admit vulnerability. On impulse, she picked up her phone and found her mother's number. She hadn't deleted it. She had simply ignored it. Her hand trembled slightly as she pressed the call button. The phone rang 3 times. Avery was bracing for voicemail, but then a familiar, weary voice answered. Hello? Mum, it's me, Avery. A long silence stretched on the other end of the line. For a moment, Avery thought her mother would hang up. Avery, Eleanor finally said, her voice raspy. I didn't think I'd hear from you. I was just calling to see how you were, Avery said, feeling awkward. Another pause. We're fine, Eleanor said, her voice devoid of emotion. The new place is all right, smaller but more manageable. I heard Liam moved to Denver. Yes, he seems to like it there, Eleanor said. There was something in her tone, regret perhaps. He says he's doing meaningful work. They talked for a few more minutes. The conversation clipped and cautious, like 2 strangers trying to find common ground. There was no mention of the wedding, the company, or the bankruptcy. They talked about the weather, about a distant relative who was ill, about a TV show they both watched. Well, I should go, Eleanor finally said, the awkwardness in her voice growing. Your father will be home soon. Yes, okay, Avery said. Take care of yourself, Mum. You too, Avery. Remember to wear warm clothes. It's getting cold. The call ended. Avery sat there, the phone still pressed to her ear, feeling a complex mix of emotions. The conversation had been stilted and unsatisfying, but it was a start. Her mother hadn't hung up on her, she hadn't accused her, and she had repeated the words from that old postcard, a coded message of love, clumsy and imperfect, but there all the same. The following week, a small package arrived at Avery's office. There was no return address. Inside was a tarnished silver picture frame. The photo was an old one she had forgotten existed. She was about 10, Liam 14. They were standing in front of the factory, and Avery was proudly holding up a small robot model she had made from scrap metal parts. Her father stood behind them, one hand on Liam's shoulder, but he was looking at Avery's robot, and on his face was a rare, unguarded smile, a smile of genuine pride. There was no note in the package, but Avery knew who it was from. It was another communication, a quiet acknowledgement of a long-forgotten past. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. Avery placed the frame on her desk, next to her gleaming business awards. It looked out of place, a relic from another world. But as she looked at it, she realized her journey wasn't about erasing the past, but about understanding it and finding a place for it in her present. The bridges had been burned, but on the other side, amidst the rubble, small signs of life were beginning to appear. 6 months after the wedding, Avery's life had found a new rhythm, a balance she'd never had before. The company was still the center of her universe, but the planets revolving around it had begun to shift. Her friendship with Sarah had deepened, providing a down-to-earth perspective she desperately needed. The brief weekly phone calls with her mother had become a routine. They were still clumsy, filled with unspoken things, but the hostility was gone, replaced by a cautious truce. She had also started making time for herself. At Sarah's suggestion, she had joined a pottery class on Tuesday nights, an activity that was the complete antithesis of her digital world. The act of working clay with her hands, of creating something tangible and imperfect, was surprisingly therapeutic. It was at the pottery class that she met Jackson Reynolds. He was an architect, a quiet, thoughtful man with laughing eyes and a perpetual smudge of clay on his jeans. Unlike the men she had dated in the past, financiers and tech entrepreneurs, who were always trying to impress her, Jackson seemed uninterested in the fact that she was the CEO of Thorne Dynamics. He was more interested in how she struggled to center a vase on the pottery wheel. They started with conversations about glazes and firing temperatures. That led to coffee after class. And then one evening to dinner, Avery found herself opening up to him in a way she never had with anyone. He listened to her story not with pity or judgment, but with quiet empathy. He had his own scars. His wife had passed away from cancer 3 years prior, and he was raising their 10-year-old daughter on his own. "You did what you had to do," he told her one evening as they walked along the harbour after dinner. "Sometimes to build something new, you have to make the hard decision to tear down the old, rotten foundation." That simple acceptance coming from an outsider was powerful. For the first time, Avery began to shed the lingering guilt she had been carrying. On a clear, crisp April morning, Avery was on her way to a meeting downtown when she received a text from an unknown number. "Ms. Thorne, this is Harold James. I know this is out of the blue. Might I buy you a cup of coffee? There is something I'd like to discuss in person." Avery stared at the text. Harold James was the father of Vanessa, the woman who was supposed to have been her sister-in-law. He was the Richard Davenport of Maple Creek, the man she had publicly humiliated and caused significant financial loss. Her curiosity won out over her caution. She suggested a neutral coffee shop in a hotel lobby. Harold James looked much older than she remembered. The smug confidence was gone, replaced by a deep-set weariness. He wore a nice suit, but it seemed to hang a little loosely on him. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, his voice no longer booming. "What do you want, Mr. James?" Avery asked directly. He stirred his coffee for a long time. I suppose I want to apologize." Avery raised an eyebrow. This was the last thing she had expected. "I acted despicably at that wedding," he continued, looking her in the eye. "I was blinded by greed and pride. I treated you as a means to an end, and I have paid the price." "I heard Davenport Manufacturing filed for bankruptcy," Avery said. "That's right," he admitted. "Losing the Nexus contract was a blow, but the truth is the company was in trouble long before that. Richard had been hiding debt for years. The merger with Thorne Manufacturing was a desperate attempt to save both sinking ships," he sighed. "Vanessa broke off the engagement shortly after, said she couldn't marry into a family that had deceived her. The irony is, we were both the deceivers." "Why are you telling me this?" Avery asked. "Because I'm trying to make right what I can," Harold said. "I have sold off a significant portion of my own company to keep it afloat. I have fired half my management staff, the yes men included. I am trying to rebuild it honestly this time." He looked at her, his gaze sharp. "Thorne Dynamics is expanding. You're building a new hardware manufacturing facility, aren't you?" Avery nodded cautiously. "Give us a chance to bid," he said. "Not as a favour, no backroom deals, just a fair shot to prove we can provide quality components at a competitive price. Let us show you that we've changed." Avery sat there completely taken aback. The man who had once dismissed her was now humbly asking for a chance. She could have refused him outright, revelled in this reversal of fortune. But as she looked at the broken man before her, she didn't see an enemy. She saw someone who, like her own father, had let his business define and nearly destroy him. "Send my procurement department a proposal," she said after a moment. "They'll review it just like every other vendor. If your numbers and your quality are good, you'll be considered. Nothing more, nothing less." A flicker of relief crossed Harold James's eyes. "Thank you. That's all I can ask." As Avery left the coffee shop, she felt another shift within her. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant releasing herself from the burden of anger. By giving Harold James a chance, not a guarantee, but just a chance, she wasn't just opening a potential business door. She was closing an old chapter in her own book, leaving the bitterness behind and choosing to move forward. That night, as she told Jackson about the meeting, she had a realization. "It's strange," she said. "I spent years thinking that success meant beating people like them, but maybe real success is being able to see them as human and still choosing to do the right thing." Jackson smiled, taking her hand. "That's not business success, Avery. That's wisdom." A year to the day after the non-wedding, Avery found herself standing on an empty plot of land in a Boston suburb. The September wind carried the first hints of autumn whipping through her hair as she looked at the construction site before her. The steel beams of Thorne Dynamics' new hardware manufacturing facility were rising against the sky, a tangible symbol of growth and the future. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Her relationship with Jackson had grown solid and deep. They had become an integral part of each other's lives, a balance of professional ambition and personal warmth. Liam had been promoted at his solar energy company in Denver and was dating a geologist. His calls were now filled with a confidence Avery had never heard before. Even the weekly calls with her mother had evolved. The awkwardness had given way to an easier familiarity. They still avoided the thorniest topics, but they found new bridges to connect on reminisced childhood memories, gossip about relatives, and even cautious advice about the small container garden Eleanor had started on her apartment balcony. The proposal from Harold James's company had come through. It was competitive, and their sample product quality was excellent. After much consideration, Avery's department awarded them a small probationary contract. It was a purely business decision, but Avery knew it carried a deeper meaning. It was against this backdrop of new peace that the phone call came. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. Avery was fast asleep next to Jackson when the jarring ring of her phone split the silence on her nightstand. She grabbed it, her heart pounding, fearing something had happened with the company, but the number on the screen was from a hospital in Maple Creek. "Hello," she said, her voice thick with sleep. "Am I speaking with Ms. Avery Thorne?" a calm female voice asked. "This is Nurse Miller from the Maple Creek General Hospital emergency room." "Yes, this is she," Avery said, sitting bolt upright in bed, waking Jackson beside her. "We're calling about your father, Edward Thorne. He was admitted about an hour ago. He's had a severe heart attack." Avery's world stopped. Is he okay?" There was a pause on the other end. "We are doing everything we can, Ms. Thorne. He's in critical condition. Your mother is here and she asked us to call you. She thought you should come home." Avery's brain kicked into gear, shifting into crisis mode. "I'll get the first flight out. I can be there by morning." "We'll let your mother know," the nurse said gently. "Travel safely." When the call ended, Avery sat in the darkness, the silence of the room feeling heavy and oppressive. Jackson placed a hand on her back. "What is it, Avery?" "It's my father," she said, her voice trembling unexpectedly. "He's had a heart attack. He's critical." Without a word, Jackson got up and turned on a lamp. "Okay," he said decisively. "I'll pack a bag for you. You call the airline. And I'm coming with you." "Jackson, you don't have to," she started. "Your work." "My work can wait," he said, looking directly into her eyes. "You're not going through this alone." 2 hours later, they were on their way to Logan Airport for a 5 a.m. flight. Avery had been on autopilot booking tickets, sending a quick email to Marcus, and her key staff to let them know she would be working remotely for a few days. She hadn't cried. She hadn't allowed herself to feel anything beyond the urgency of the situation. It was only when the plane took off rising above the sleeping city that her emotional dam began to crack. She was going back to Maple Creek, not on her own terms, not for a business showdown, but for a raw, terrifying family crisis. Jackson took her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. "Do you want to talk about it?" Avery shook her head. "There's nothing to talk about. He's my father. He's in the hospital. I have to go." But inside, a tornado of conflicting emotions was raging. The fear of losing the father she never really had. Guilt. Did the stress of losing the company cause this anger at herself for feeling anything other than indifference? She had spent so long building walls around her heart to protect it from him, and now she didn't know how to take them down. As the plane flew west into the breaking dawn, Avery stared out the window, but she didn't see the clouds. She saw her father's face in the old photograph on her desk, that rare, proud smile, a fleeting moment of connection in a lifetime of distance. And for the first time since the call, she felt hot tears begin to well in her eyes. She wasn't crying for the father who had failed her. She was crying for the father she might have had, and for the fact that the time to find him might be running out. The halls of Maple Creek General Hospital smelled of antiseptic and latent fear, a universal scent that was the same in every hospital in the world. It was the antithesis of the controlled, clean air of Avery's world. She and Jackson walked quickly down the drab beige corridors, following signs for the Cardiac Care Unit, CCU. They found Eleanor in a small, deserted waiting room. She was sitting in an uncomfortable plastic chair, staring at a blank spot on the wall. She looked small and fragile, much smaller than Avery remembered. When she looked up and saw Avery, her face crumpled with a complex emotion, relief, pain, and maybe even shame. "Avery," she whispered. She stood up, and for the first time in 15 years, she hugged her daughter. It was an awkward, bony embrace, but Avery felt the tremors in her mother's body and held her tighter. "How is he, Mum?" Avery asked when they let go. "The doctor said they've stabilized him," Eleanor said, her voice trembling. "The heart attack was massive. They did a procedure to open a blocked artery. Now we wait." Eleanor's gaze shifted to Jackson, who was standing at a respectful distance. "Mum," Avery said, the awkwardness of the situation palpable, "this is Jackson Reynolds. Jackson, this is my mother, Eleanor Thorne." Jackson stepped forward, extending his hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Thorne. I'm so sorry for what's happened." Eleanor took his hand, a flicker of gratitude in her tired eyes. "Thank you for being here with her." They sat, a heavy silence filling the small waiting room. Time moved slowly. Every hour a nurse would come out with a brief clinical update. "His blood pressure is stable. He's still sedated. No change." In that waiting period, the walls Avery had built around herself began to completely crumble. She wasn't CEO Avery Thorne, maker of million-dollar decisions. She was just a daughter sitting in a hospital waiting room, terrified her father was going to die. Was it my fault?" Avery finally asked, the question escaping as a pained whisper. "Losing the company? Did the stress cause this?" Eleanor turned to her, and for the first time, Avery saw an unwavering clarity in her mother's eyes. "No, Avery, don't you ever think that," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. "Your father has been living with that stress for years. The company was failing long before you. Before the wedding, he hid it from everyone, including me. He was too proud to admit defeat." She let out a shaky sigh. "The truth is, losing the company probably saved his life. It forced him to stop, but I guess the damage was already done." They sat in silence for another moment. Then Eleanor said, "He kept that picture on his desk." "What picture?" "The one of you with the robot, the one he sent you," Eleanor said. After we lost the company, when we were clearing out his office, it was one of the few personal things he brought home. He put it on his nightstand. He never said anything about it, but I think it was his way of saying he was proud of you. He just never knew how. Tears pricked Avery's eyes again, but this time they weren't tears of grief, but of a complicated understanding. In the mid-afternoon, the cardiologist came to see them. He was a middle-aged man with a calm, reassuring demeanour. "Mr. Thorne is out of immediate danger," he said. "The procedure was a success. There is damage to his heart, but we believe he can make a full recovery provided he makes significant lifestyle changes. Less stress, better diet, exercise." He paused. "He's going to need a lot of support from his family." The relief that washed over Avery was so powerful, she almost swayed. Jackson put a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Can we see him?" Eleanor asked. "One at a time and just for a few minutes, the doctor said. "He's still very weak. He may or may not be awake." Eleanor looked at Avery. "You go first." Avery was stunned. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," Eleanor said, her voice firm. "It's time." Avery walked into the CCU room. It was cold and filled with the rhythmic beeping of machines. Her father lay in the bed, looking small and frail amidst the wires and tubes. His skin was pale, but his breathing was steady. He looked much older than his 65 years. She stood by the bed, unsure of what to say. She reached out and tentatively touched his hand. The hand that had once commanded heavy machinery was now limp and lifeless. "Dad," she whispered. "It's me, Avery." His eyelids fluttered, but they didn't open. "You need to rest," she said, her voice catching. "You need to get better. Mum needs you, and I do too." The words hung in the sterile air of the room. She didn't know if he heard them. But for the first time she had spoken the truth, a truth she had buried under years of defences. When she walked back into the waiting room, she felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. She had faced the past, not with anger or confrontation, but with vulnerability and a flicker of hope. Jackson pulled her into a hug. "You did it," he said softly, and in his arms, Avery knew that whatever happened next, she wouldn't have to face it alone. The road ahead might be long and uncertain, but for the first time, the road home no longer seemed so scary. Edward Thorne did not wake up that day, nor the next. He remained in a sedated state, his body fighting the arduous battle to heal. Avery and Jackson stayed in Maple Creek. They checked into a small hotel and their days fell into a quiet routine of hospital visits, a silent vigil alongside Eleanor. In those long hours of waiting, a subtle shift occurred. Avery and her mother began to talk, truly talk. Not the superficial conversations about weather, but real dialogues about the lost years. Eleanor told Avery about her fear and helplessness watching her husband grow more distant, consumed by a dying company. Avery, for the first time, shared her loneliness and sense of abandonment during her years in Chicago, the constant pressure to prove herself. "I always thought you were so strong you didn't need us," Eleanor admitted one afternoon, her voice thick with regret. "I had to be strong," Avery replied gently, "because I thought I didn't have you." On the third day, Liam arrived. He flew in from Denver, his face etched with worry. The hug he gave Avery in the hospital waiting room wasn't awkward. It was tight and heartfelt. Seeing the three of them, Avery, Liam and Eleanor together, Jackson quietly excused himself, giving them their space. Liam's presence broke down the final barriers. He spoke openly of his resentment at being forced down a path he never wanted and the liberation he felt at finally being free. "The ironic thing is," he said, "it was you blowing everything up, Avery, that saved all of us." On the morning of the fourth day, when Avery walked into the hospital room alone, she found her father awake. His eyes were open, and though he was weak, they were lucid. He looked at her, and in his gaze she saw no anger or judgment. She saw only exhaustion and something that looked like remorse. He held out a hand, a small, effort-filled gesture. Avery took it. "My girl," he rasped, his voice a raw whisper. "I'm sorry." 2 words. The two words Avery had waited her whole life to hear, but never thought she would. They couldn't erase years of hurt, but they opened a door. "I know, Dad," she whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. "Just rest. I'm here." Edward Thorne's recovery was long and slow. After 2 weeks in the hospital, he was moved to a rehabilitation facility. Avery stayed in Maple Creek for that first week, working remotely from the hotel, balancing conference calls with time at the hospital. Jackson had to return to Boston, but he called every night, his steady presence a source of strength even from a distance. Before Avery left, the family had a meeting in Edward's hospital room. It wasn't a business meeting, but a family council. They talked about the future. Edward and Eleanor would live on savings and pensions. Liam would continue building his life in Denver, and Avery would continue being herself, but with a difference. She had found her way back. 6 months later, on a sunny April Sunday, a small party was held at Avery's penthouse in Boston. Gathered around the circular dining table in her living room was a group that would have been unimaginable a year ago. Eleanor and Edward, looking healthier and more relaxed than Avery had ever seen them, had flown in from Pennsylvania. It was their first trip to Boston. Liam and his girlfriend, a smart and funny geologist named Chloe, flew in from Denver. Sarah Evans and her young daughter were there, and sitting beside Avery, his hand resting lightly on hers under the table, was Jackson. There was no tension, no subtext. Edward talked with Jackson about sustainable architecture. Eleanor and Sarah traded recipes. Liam and Chloe told stories about their hiking trips in the Rockies. In the middle of the meal, Edward raised his water glass. The table fell silent. "I want to say something," he said, his voice stronger now. He looked around the table, his gaze settling on Avery. "I spent most of my life building something I thought was important, a company, a legacy. I was wrong. Everything that truly matters is right here around this table, and I owe my brave daughter a thank you for showing me that." He looked directly at Avery. "Thank you, Avery, for saving me from myself." An emotional silence filled the room for a moment. Avery could only nod, her heart full of a warmth she never thought possible. After dinner, while the others chatted in the living room, Avery and Liam stood on the balcony, looking out at the glittering harbour. "Did you ever think we'd get here?" Liam asked. "Never," Avery admitted. "Do you regret any of it?" Liam thought for a moment. "I regret not standing up for you sooner, but I don't regret that it all fell apart. Sometimes things need to be completely destroyed so they can be rebuilt the right way." Avery looked inside where her parents were laughing with Jackson. She saw Sarah, who had been given a fresh start. She saw Liam, who had found himself. And she felt Jackson's hand rest gently on her waist as he joined her on the balcony. She had walked out of that wedding alone, thinking she was severing all ties. But in the end, that act wasn't an ending. It was a catalyst. It broke a family built on a false foundation, but from the rubble they had begun to build something new and far more real. The chair in the kitchen had been the starting point of a journey home she never knew she needed to take. And this time, at the round table in her own home, surrounded by a family redefined by respect and love, Avery knew she had finally found her place.